Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was February 12th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Welcome to the 50th document for the podcast. Wow, they really do just add up, don't they? I can't believe that this is number 50. If you've been listening to all of them, wow. It's adding up, and we are not, even 25% done. Because we are going for the long haul of 365. And I have to admit that I'm not sure if it's actually going to materialize, the 365, because it does take a lot of time, especially if it's a Latin document, for me to figure out what's going on and to do some of the work to contextualize what's happening in a particular document. And it is more than I thought it would be. I knew that it would be a lot, but sometimes there can be just a very long period of investigation to figure out even just some of the basics. So we'll see what happens. I'm still really pumped to do a whole year because I think we'll get to see things that we otherwise wouldn't see. So I'm still into it. Let's see what happens when we get to episode 100. But yeah, it's a process, but I'm enjoying it so much, and I hope you are too. And all right, let's talk about today's document. The document is from the very earliest folios of a secret seal register of Joan's. So we are looking at folio 2V of register 1954. And the wormholes and bug holes that we see here are very extensive. It's not actually the worst that I've seen, but it's pretty bad. I think that these patterns are beautiful to look at, honestly. I think that there's kind of a sadness at the destruction of the historical content and the idea that we're missing out on the information, so there's a sense of loss there. But there's also this kind of commemoration of the passage of time and the force of the non-human actors on these material objects. So the patterns that we see are sort of like a Rorschach kind of experience where you can look at them and see destruction, or you can look at them and see collaboration of material and living entities over this gigantic period of time. Although I would like to know how long it takes for this destruction to occur. So once a worm gets in, or once the bugs get in, how many days does it take, or years, does it take to generate this? The holes that we see don't go all the way through. So there's certain holes that will appear on every single folio of a register because some kind of worm went just, perpendicular to, the thing. And then other times we see, like in this particular register, the damage is really extensive in like the first 10 folios, but once you get deeper in, they just didn't go further. And so they stayed sort of along those surface layers. So I'm really curious to know the time span of this action that we see a remnant of on the part of the worms and bugs. I'd also really like to know more specific details about, if we can, what kinds of worms and bugs did this. I just am interested in the materiality of this archive. And remember, like, over 6 centuries, paper has been sitting around with this information, this ink and paper. It's just sometimes easy to say 639 years, but just take a moment and think about how much time that is. Where, for example, stuff that feels so long ago, like the American Revolution, is like only about a third of the way back to getting to when these characters were written with ink on this paper. So just wanted to riff about the experience of the archive and indulge in a little romanticization of this particular archive. And there's a critique of that that historians can be too indulgent when it comes to romanticizing the archive. And so occasionally I do pull back and take notice of how the archive is commissioned with a purpose, and that purpose is to bolster power and to bolster an unequal social hierarchy that was exploitative for a lot of people. So it's always good whenever you slip into the romanticizing of the archive to pull back and notice that this is an instrument of power and that it was bolstering and holding up a society that benefited the most powerful and the most wealthy and harmed those with little power. Let's talk about the document itself here. So it's in Latin. The addressee is very difficult to read because of the worm damage at the top, but at the bottom we can see it very clearly. Fuit missa collegio cardinalem. So the College of Cardinals is the group that Joan is writing to in this letter. And it's about the request or intercession to promote somebody to be a cardinal for the Avignon Papacy. And that person is someone that Joan is very well aware of. It's Joan's first cousin once removed. So I always need a little bit of an explanation when I get into some of the cousin descriptors. So what's going on in this familial relationship is that Joan's father, Père the Ceremonious, his cousin is the person who is being discussed here. So the cousin of Père the Ceremonious is named James and is a bishop in Valencia. He eventually does get accepted into the College of Cardinals, so he becomes the Cardinal of Valencia. He was in Avignon starting in 1388, so I think it might have taken a good year or more for his application to be a cardinal to be processed and accepted. So at this moment, I think It seems like we're getting the ball rolling, or we might be continuing on with a process initiated by Père the Ceremonious. So in the interline between line 4 and 5, we can see that Joan is referencing his own father. And I think it's really interesting to notice the word choices that he uses, and I'm not quite sure of the valence and resonance of those word choices right now, but I want to note them because I still can't get it out of my head when he wrote to his father-in-law and called him most dear father. That was a couple episodes ago. In this letter, he refers to Père, his father, in the following way. Serenissimi Domini Regis Petri Genitoris Nostri. Our genitor. I don't think the translation works quite at that level of cognate. Our progenitor, the person who progenied me. I didn't actually look up this word in the dictionary, the Latin to English dictionary, so maybe there's a nice smoother translation there. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Another Latin word that's coming up again and again in this letter is publicationis. And it's a really interesting word because I did look that one up, and it's like there's all these different resonances that can be used for that word. It has something to do with of the state, of the public body, but I can't quite figure out why it's being used so much in this context and why it's being used in association with the Bishop of Valencia, Joan's first cousin once removed, named James. One other thing that I want to bring in about James, who is the Bishop of Valencia, soon to be Cardinal of Valencia, is that he was really into literature, and he commissioned a bunch of translations of classical literature, one of which was a text that's already come up in the podcast, Valerius Maximus. So this was the classical text that Joan was really anxious about securing from his father's library, and he wrote to his brother Marti as their father was dying and said, it's just really important for you to get these items and make sure to hold on to them for me. And one of them was the Valerius Maximus text, and then there was one that was like a dog, had a name, I think. So anyway, James, Bishop of Valencia, he is someone who has been recorded as commissioning translations of classical texts, and I found that reference in a secondary source on the classical tradition in Catalan culture. I can't remember the exact title. I will put it, though, in the webpage, in the bibliography for today's document. There's one other thing that I want to point out about this document, and that is on line 12. There's this interesting cross-out, and then in the interline we see a word that looks to me like inquisitura. So maybe this is something that has to do with an inquisition, but then we have after that regalis sanguinis. So something about like the royal blood. So I am curious about what's going on there. And what is the content of this long letter that Joan is writing in support of James, Bishop of Valencia, becoming a cardinal, and how that word inquisitura might relate to it. And just have to leave that as an open question for now and come back to it after getting a bit more practice with Latin this year. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, then I have, once again, for the 50th time, done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.